Presiding Officer, normal countries have constitutions, and they have constitutions for very good reasons. These include, of course, for constituting a state, setting out its institutions, giving them power, saying what they can and they cannot do. But it's much more than just that. A constitution is about ambition, it's about imagination, about setting out the sort of country that you aspire to be, about identifying and making real your values as a country, and about protecting and promoting people's rights. Presiding Officer, a constitution reveals as much as it prescribes. It tells you what a country's priorities are. It tells you where power lies. So what we learn about the UK's priorities and where power lies from looking at its constitution. Because, of course, the UK has an unwritten constitution, and that has only one immutable principle, namely, to which everything else is subservient, and that is Westminster parliamentary sovereignty. It's an abstract idea, Presiding Officer, yes, but not abstract in its effect, and this is very real. So let me give the Chamber some examples. The Human Rights Act is one of the greatest parliamentary achievements of the last 30 years. It has delivered justice for people across the whole of British society and has ensured that public authorities can be held properly to account. Yet, it has no more protection under Westminster sovereignty than any other law. Successive UK governments have threatened to repeal protections that the citizens of other modern democracies take for granted. This Parliament's Children's Rights Bill. The Supreme Court has ruled that under the Scotland Act, it cannot even extend across all of devolved law, since it affects acts passed by the UK Parliament. Laws entirely within devolved competence in areas like health and education that would impugn the sovereignty of Westminster. International law. As we saw in the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, the UK Government considers itself able to seek to legislate contrary to its international obligations, because Westminster sovereignty sees international law not as a celebration of common humanity or as an essential tool in rising to the challenges of the 21st century, but as a threat to its place as the ultimate source of legal authority. And even this Parliament's powers and responsibilities that we were all, regardless of our party, elected to exercise and to hold the government accountable for the use of. 9 times, and counting, the UK Parliament has ignored the votes of MSPs and passed laws within or about devolved competence without our consent. So the UK's unwritten constitution reveals that its priority to be the preservation of Westminster power, and that power elsewhere is held on sufferance at Westminster's grace and favour. Of course, happy to.
John Mason.
I'm very grateful for the Cabinet Secretary giving way. He says the UK has an unwritten constitution. Is the reality not really that the UK has no constitution?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, if you were to extend the period I have to speak to this question, I would happily go into the highways and byways of the UK's unwritten constitution, but I see you shaking your head. I would suggest, Presiding Officer, that we can do better than the situation we currently find ourselves in the United Kingdom. I believe that in Scotland we do have aspirations and values in common, and we can organise ourselves around those. I'm not talking here about the approach just of this government or even those in Scotland that support independence as our ultimate constitutional destination. I'm talking about something more fundamental and more long-term, reaching across the parties in this Parliament, across the people who live and work in Scotland. A belief in putting rights and equality at the heart of everything that we do. A belief in creating opportunity in a well-being economy that combines dynamism and entrepreneurship with fairness. A belief in being outward-looking as a nation, reflected in our overwhelming vote to remain in the European Union, and recognising we amplify our sovereignty, not diminish it, when we work together with our international partners as a sovereign state. And a belief, one that certainly used to be shared on a cross-party basis, that as set out in the Claim of Right for Scotland, the constitutional tradition in Scotland is that it is the people here that are sovereign here. Presiding Officer, this government has shown in the first paper in the Building a New Scotland series that it is in countries that identify and pursue and organise around these common aims that do the best, that are wealthier, that are happier, that are fairer. And what we have now set out in the fourth paper in that series is how we could, with independence, make real on the promise on those shared values and those common priorities. How we could put in place an ambitious interim constitution at the point of independence, so that a newly independent Scotland would start benefiting from constitutional government from day one. How we could come together as a nation, how the people who live and work here could contribute through a constitutional convention to the drafting of a permanent constitution for an independent Scotland, and how a Scottish constitution could put power where it belongs, in the hands of the people who live here. And that is what it means for there to be a constitutional recognition of the National Health Service in Scotland and a right to access a system of health care free at the point of need. It puts power in the hands of the people. If there were ever a government in Scotland that sought to retreat from or compromise on that principle, the Constitution would empower the people to stop them. It would empower the people with the fullest range of rights and give them the tools to enforce them. We propose constitutionally embedding not just the rights in the Human Rights Act, those derived from the European Convention on Human Rights and the related protections built into the Scotland Act, but the rights in the UNCRC and all of the rights in the forthcoming Scottish Human Rights Bill. And with independence, these rights would not be limited by Westminster sovereignty or by the devolution settlement. They would extend across matters devolved and matters that are currently reserved. It would not be possible for any government to simply use a majority in the Scottish Parliament to repeal those rights as it is in Westminster. These rights would belong to the people, and it should be beyond the authority of any democratically elected legislature to violate the right of the people that it serves. And we could, finally, constitutionally prohibit nuclear weapons from ever being based on Scottish soil. Presiding Officer, who could fail to be excited by the opportunities? Who could, faced with the question, what sort of country would you like Scotland to be, answer one that organises itself around the sovereignty of the Westminster Parliament? And I have to say, I find it hugely encouraging that there are people beyond the independence-supporting voters of Scotland who also agree. Many members in this chamber know, and no doubt hold in very high regard, as I do, Baroness Kennedy, one of the leading human rights lawyers and constitutional campaigners in this country. And she said, although she does not support Scotland becoming independent, if Scotland is thinking one day it is going to be independent, I happen not to be in the camp, but if that is the road that Scotland is going down, then people should be going to work on creating a written constitution for an independent Scotland, definitely. I would do it now if I were in that camp. Well, that camp, Presiding Officer, is represented by a majority in this Parliament elected by the people of Scotland. And that is exactly what we are doing. We are doing what we have been asked to do by the electorate, and we have published what I think is a hugely exciting document, and regardless of whether one wishes Scotland to be independent or not, imagine the future of this country where its rights, its obligations, its form is represented through a written constitution, just like pretty much every single other country in the world. If it's good enough for them, it's good enough for us, Presiding Officer. We are going to go on in future building a new Scotland, publishing a series of papers to set out what this government sees as the opportunities of independence and how we would address the challenges of becoming independent. The next paper in the series published this summer will set out what an inclusive and welcoming approach to Scottish citizenship could look like, one that would ultimately see the people of Scotland have their rights as European citizens, rights that they never voted to give up, returned to them. And future papers will go on to set out what we would do with culture, with our extraordinary marine resources, with the energy market, and with Scotland retaking its place in the European Union and the wider world. But sitting behind all of them will be the propositions and the possibilities of this paper, What could Scotland look like if we had the chance and the opportunity to put its future in the people's hands? Presiding Officer, I move the motion in my name.